The town of Silver Creek baked under the relentless Arizona sun, a scatter of clapboard buildings clinging to life against the edge of the desert. Dust hung in the air like a veil, and every breath carried the taste of grit and heat. Wagons groaned down the single street, and horses stamped impatiently outside the saloon where the piano's weary keys sang half-forgotten tunes. On the North Ridge, overlooking it all, stood the Thornton Ranch, a proud estate of weathered timber and wide corrals. It was here that Abigail Thornton, the colonel's daughter, lived her quiet life, a golden-haired figure out of place in a land of dust and gunpowder. At 18, Abby was known throughout the territory for her beauty, soft blue eyes, skin untouched by the sun, and a voice like morning rain. But what folks whispered most was that she was innocent. Too innocent for the wild frontier. Her father, Colonel Henry Thornton, had fought the Apache Wars and carved a ranch from the wilderness. He ruled his household like a military outpost, discipline, order, and the unspoken command that his daughter was to be shielded from the roughness of life beyond the fences. To the colonel, the West was a place of savagery and lawlessness, something to be conquered and contained. To Abby, it was a place of mystery. She watched the desert as if it were alive. The red cliffs, the thunderclouds gathering over the horizon, the distant echo of drums that rose from the canyons when the wind was right. She'd grown up hearing stories of the Apache, the fierce riders who slipped like shadows through the hills. The townsfolk called them devils, but Abby wondered if they were truly monsters, or simply people fighting to survive. Each morning, she rode her chestnut mare, Daisy, beyond the fences her father forbade her to cross. She liked to feel the air on her face, the freedom that came when no one watched her. Too far, her father would warn. That land belongs to the Apache. They don't take kindly to trespassers. Still, Abby longed for something beyond safety, something she couldn't name. Every Sunday, a young cavalry officer, Lieutenant James Cartwright, came calling. He was a fine man by any measure, tall, clean-cut, and well-spoken, the kind of husband any father would trust with his daughter. He'd fought beside Colonel Thornton and was already spoken of as a future commander. James brought Abby wildflowers, read her poetry from back east, and spoke of the life they might have. A house in Santa Fe, maybe a posting in Fort Bowie, dinners with other officers' wives. It was a dream painted in soft colors, respectable, secure, and utterly lifeless. Abby smiled politely when he spoke, but her thoughts wandered. When he took her hand, she felt nothing but courtesy. When he leaned close, she felt the weight of expectation, the world telling her this was what love was supposed to look like. Yet her heart remained untouched. At night, lying awake, she'd stare at the moon through her window and whisper, "There must be more than this." One afternoon in late summer, the sky stretched cloudless and the air shimmered with heat. The ranch hands had gone to town for supplies, and her father was away on army business. Abby saddled Daisy and rode out, ignoring the invisible line where her father's orders ended and the wilderness began. The land rolled into open prairie, golden with dry grass, and beyond it, the earth rose into jagged cliffs, Apache country. Abby rode on, the thrill of rebellion quickening her breath. She followed a shallow stream that wound between rocks and mesquite, the sunlight flashing on the water. For the first time, she felt truly free. Then it happened, a sudden hiss beneath her horse's hooves. Daisy reared, screaming. Abby clung to the reins, but the world tilted. She fell hard, striking her head on a stone. The world spun into a blur of blue and gold before it went black. When she woke, her head throbbed, and the sky above her had turned to fire, the sun sinking low. A shadow moved across her face. She gasped and froze. Standing over her was an Apache warrior. He was tall and lean, his skin bronzed by the sun, his hair long and black, tied with strips of rawhide. His eyes were dark, not cruel but sharp, watchful. He wore a simple deerskin shirt, and around his neck hung a talisman of bone and turquoise. Abby's breath caught. Every tale she'd heard as a child came rushing back. Raids, scalps, massacres. She scrambled backward, but pain shot through her ankle. The warrior raised his hand, not in threat, but in peace. His voice, when he spoke, was low and steady. "You are hurt," he said in broken English. "Do not move." Abby stared, speechless. He knelt beside her, poured water from a pouch into her trembling hands. "Drink," he said. Something inside her, the fear, the prejudice, the years of warnings, faltered. She drank, her eyes never leaving his. "Who are you?" she whispered. He hesitated. "I am K-10," he said finally. "Hawk who walks alone." The name fit him. Everything about him carried that same air of solitude, proud, unbending, as if the world itself could not command him. He studied her for a moment, then lifted his gaze to the horizon. "White soldiers come this way," he murmured. "You should not be here." Abby blinked, realizing the truth. Patrols from her father's fort often rode through these parts. "My horse ran," she said softly. "I didn't mean—" K-10 held up a hand. "Words do not matter. You live. That is enough." Without another word, he lifted her easily in his arms, carrying her toward the shelter of a rocky ridge. Abby, too dazed to protest, felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the unknown. She was drawn to it. They reached a small hollow where a fire burned low. Other figures watched from the shadows. Apache riders, their faces painted, their expressions unreadable. Abby's heart thudded, but K-10 spoke to them in his tongue, firm and calm. The others stepped back, obeying. He set her down gently, bound her twisted ankle with cloth torn from his own shirt, and handed her a piece of dried meat. She took it hesitantly. For a long while they sat in silence, the kind of silence that holds more than words. Abby studied his face in the firelight, strong, marked by both pride and sadness. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. She realized with a strange certainty that this man was not her enemy. He was something else, something she had never known before. When dawn came, he spoke again. "I take you to my people," he said. "They will decide." Her heart pounded. "Will they hurt me?" K-10 looked at her, his expression unreadable. "No," he said quietly. "Not while I breathe." And so, beneath the rising sun, the colonel's daughter rode into the desert in the care of the man she had been raised to fear, not knowing that the journey ahead would lead her not into captivity, but into the heart of a love that would change them both forever. Under the burning sky of the Arizona Territory, the desert stretched endlessly, cruel and magnificent. Abby rode in silence among the Apache riders, her hands bound loosely before her. The horses moved with a grace born of the wild, their hooves leaving barely a whisper on the sand. She dared not speak, dared not ask what fate awaited her. Every so often she caught K-10's dark eyes glancing back at her, not with cruelty, but with a quiet watchfulness that unsettled her more than hatred ever could. They traveled for hours until the sun bled into the horizon. Finally, they reached a hidden canyon, a narrow passage opening into a valley rimmed with red cliffs. Smoke curled from low fires. Children ran to meet the riders. Women paused in their work, and old men watched with sharp measuring eyes. It was a village alive with a rhythm that felt older than the wind. When K-10 lifted Abby from his horse, the murmurs began. The people looked upon her, pale skin, golden hair, as though she were a ghost from another world. An elderly chieftain approached, his face carved by time and sorrow. K-10 bowed his head. The old man's gaze was heavy, his words a series of firm, clipped tones. K-10 answered in the same tongue, his voice carrying conviction. Abby understood nothing, yet she sensed the argument beneath their words. Mercy against suspicion, trust against fear. At last the chieftain turned and spoke in halting English. "You are safe. You stay until healed. Then you go." Abby nodded, though her heart trembled. She was led to a small hut near the edge of the camp. The Apache women tended her wounds with herbs that stung but healed quickly. They watched her with guarded curiosity. No hatred, just wary fascination. When she tried to thank them, they smiled faintly and spoke words she could not understand. For the first time, she felt less like a captive and more like a lost traveler among strangers. Days passed. The rhythm of the camp began to seep into her bones. The early morning fires, the laughter of children, the steady beat of drums that marked the evenings. The Apache lived with a grace she had never seen among her own people. Every action deliberate, every word purposeful. They wasted nothing, neither time nor spirit. K-10 kept his distance at first, speaking only when necessary. Yet she often caught sight of him near the ridge, standing alone against the wind, his silhouette framed by the dying light. The others treated him with respect, even reverence. She learned from whispers that he was a warrior without a family, a man whose kin had fallen to soldiers long ago, men, perhaps, like her father's. Curiosity overcame fear. One evening, when the sky glowed purple and the fires burned low, Abby approached him. He was sharpening his knife, the blade flashing like quicksilver. "You saved me," she said quietly. "Why?" Katan did not look up. "Because killing you would bring nothing back," he answered. "And because you did not look at me with hate." She hesitated. "Should I have?" He finally met her gaze. "Most of your kind do." There was no bitterness in his tone, only a calm truth that made her chest ache. "Not all of us," she said softly. "Not me." From that night on, their words grew slowly, like the fragile bloom of cactus after rain. She learned bits of his language. He taught her to understand the calls of hawks, the signs in the wind, the meaning of silence. He spoke of the land, how the mountains had souls, how the stars were the campfires of ancestors watching over the living. His world was woven from stories, and Abby listened as though hearing the voice of the earth itself. In return, she told him of her own life, the ranch, the piano she played for her father, the white fences that kept her safe and caged. Katan listened, though his eyes held quiet amusement. "Fences," he said once, shaking his head. "You call them safety. I call them walls." As days turned into weeks, something between them began to shift. When he smiled, which was rare, the hard lines of his face softened. When she laughed, truly laughed, the sound startled even her. The distance between them, once measured in fear, now pulsed with something neither dared to name. One afternoon, while gathering water by the stream, Abby slipped on the rocks and nearly fell. Katan caught her, his arm around her waist. For a heartbeat, they stood close, the world narrowing to the warmth of his touch and the thrum of her pulse. She pulled away quickly, blushing, yet the memory of that moment burned long after the sun had set. The Apache women noticed. They teased her gently in words she couldn't fully understand, but their knowing smiles made her heart race. And yet in the back of her mind, a shadow grew, the memory of her father, of Lieutenant Cartwright, of the life she was meant to return to. The fragile peace shattered one morning when a scout rode into camp, breathless, bringing grim news. Cavalry patrols had been spotted near the ridge. The soldiers were hunting for the colonel's missing daughter. Panic rippled through the camp. Abby saw it in their faces, fear not for her safety, but for their own. Her presence had brought danger. That night, the chieftain spoke again with Katan beside the fire. The talk was long and heated. Abby stood on the edge of the circle, unable to understand the words, but feeling every emotion. Finally, Katan approached her. "You must go," he said. "The soldiers will come soon. If they find you here, my people will die." Abby shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "No, I can't, not like this. They'll kill you. They'll kill all of you." Katan's jaw tightened. "I will take you to them myself if I must. It is the only way. Why do you care what happens to me?" she asked, voice trembling. He stepped closer, his expression fierce and sorrowful. "Because when I look at you, I remember that not all hearts are meant for war." His words broke something inside her. She wanted to tell him that she understood, that she would rather stay in this world of firelight and stars than return to one of walls and duty. But before she could speak, he turned away and disappeared into the shadows. That night, Abby lay awake, listening to the wind move through the canyon. She could hear the faint sound of drums, slow, mournful, ancient. Somewhere beyond the camp, Katan stood alone, his face lifted to the heavens, the moon casting silver across his scars. Neither of them slept. They both knew that dawn would bring an end to whatever fragile dream they had shared. And yet, as the first light crept over the horizon, when Katan came to wake her for the journey back, their eyes met and lingered. For one unguarded instant, the distance between their worlds vanished. No words were spoken, but the truth lay in that gaze. Two souls from opposite sides of a war, bound by something deeper than understanding. She climbed onto the horse without protest, her heart heavy. The camp faded behind them, swallowed by the desert's vast silence. Ahead lay the world she had known, but it already felt foreign, empty. She did not know if she would ever see him again. Yet the echo of his voice and the warmth of his touch followed her like a shadow. In the heart of the desert, where love and danger met beneath the same sun, Abby Thornton's innocence had ended, and something far more powerful had begun. The autumn wind came early that year, carrying the scent of dust and gun smoke across the Arizona plains. For weeks, soldiers rode the trails around Silver Creek, searching for signs of the missing colonel's daughter. They found hoof prints, torn fabric, even an abandoned campsite, but no proof of her fate. Some said she had been taken deep into the Sierra Madre by the Apache. Others swore she'd been killed and buried in a nameless canyon. The truth, like the desert, kept its secrets well. When Abby returned, escorted by Katan to the outskirts of her father's land, she was no longer the girl who had vanished. Her skin had been browned by the sun, her eyes sharpened by things she could never speak of. The moment she stepped back onto Thornton soil, she felt the weight of two worlds pressing down on her, one bound by fences, the other by freedom. Katan stopped at the edge of a mesquite grove where the land began to slope toward the ranch. The early light cast long shadows over them. He dismounted silently and offered his hand to help her down. "You go from here," he said quietly. "Your people wait." She wanted to speak, to tell him she couldn't go back, that she belonged nowhere now. But her voice faltered. She could see soldiers in the distance, their blue coats bright against the sand. "They'll shoot you if they see you," she whispered. A faint smile touched his lips. "Then I will vanish like smoke." Abby hesitated. "Will I see you again?" Katan's gaze lingered on her face, the girl who had crossed into his world and changed it. "Perhaps," he said. "When the hawk circles above the canyon, look to the sky. That is where I will be." Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode away into the sunrise without a backward glance. Abby stood there until he disappeared beyond the rocks, her heart heavy with something she had no name for. Love, sorrow, longing, all tangled into one. When she reached the ranch, the guards cried out in disbelief. Moments later, her father rode up, dismounting before she could speak. He seized her in his arms, his voice breaking with relief. "Abby!" "My God, they said you were dead." She tried to answer, but the words caught in her throat. Behind him, soldiers watched curiously, their faces a mix of pity and suspicion. She was brought inside, fed, and questioned for hours. Where she had been, who had taken her, how she had escaped. Abby told only fragments, that she had fallen, been found by a band of Apache and released unharmed. But her father's eyes narrowed. "They didn't harm you?" "No," she said firmly. The colonel's jaw tightened. "Then they used you for something worse, a message." She rose, her voice trembling but defiant. "They used me for nothing. They saved me." That was the first time she saw anger flash in his eyes, not at her, but at what she represented. To him, mercy from an Apache was impossible. To her, it had been salvation. Days turned into weeks. The townsfolk came to see her, offering condolences and curiosity thinly veiled as kindness. Women whispered behind their fans about how she had lived among the savages. Men spoke of vengeance, urging the colonel to lead another campaign into the mountains. The world she had returned to was smaller now, filled with voices that could not understand what she had seen. Lieutenant Cartwright came to visit, his face drawn with worry. "You don't know what it did to us, Abby," he said softly. "We thought you were gone for good." She forced a smile. "I'm home, James, you needn't worry anymore." But he studied her face carefully, as if searching for the girl he'd once known. "You've changed," he said at last. "Maybe I've just learned how big the world really is." He hesitated. "You mean those people, the ones who took you, taught you that?" "They're not what you think." He laughed bitterly. "They're the reason we can't sleep without rifles by the door." Her patience broke. "And we're the reason they can't sleep at all." Cartwright fell silent, stunned by her words. He had fought battles against the Apache, seen the aftermath of raids, the burned-out wagons. To him, they were the enemy. To hear Abby defend them was like hearing the wind speak in a foreign tongue. When he left that evening, he told the colonel quietly, "She's not the same girl, sir. They've done something to her." The colonel's expression hardened. "Then I'll see to it she forgets." But Abby could not forget. Every night she dreamed of the canyon, of firelight dancing against redstone, of laughter, of a voice calling her name on the wind. She would wake before dawn, her heart aching for something she could never have again. One evening, while riding alone beyond the ranch fences, she heard it, a cry from above. A hawk circled high, its wings gleaming gold against the sun. Her heart leapt. She followed the sound to the edge of a ravine where the land fell away into open desert. And there, standing beside his horse, was Katan. For a long moment neither spoke. Then she dismounted and went to him, tears welling in her eyes. "You came back," she whispered. "I said I would." he replied simply. She reached out, her fingers trembling. If they find you here, they will not, he said. I came to see if you are safe. I am, she lied. He studied her, seeing the sadness she tried to hide. You are not meant for cages, Abby Thornton. She shook her head. But that's what this life is. They all look at me like I'm a stranger. I can't breathe here anymore. Caton stepped closer, his voice low. Then come with me. Leave this place. There is a world beyond fences. A world that asks for nothing but your heart. Her breath caught. If I go, my father will never forgive me. They'll call me a traitor. And if you stay? He asked. She looked away. Then I'll live a lie until I die. The wind swept between them, carrying the scent of rain. For a heartbeat, it seemed the whole desert held its breath. Then Caton reached for her hand, not in possession, but in offering. The path of the heart is the hardest, he said softly. But it is the only one worth walking. For a moment she wanted to take it. To run, to disappear into the wild with him and never look back. But the sound of distant gunfire shattered the moment. Soldiers drilling near the fort. The world came rushing back, cruel and real. You must go, she said, her voice breaking. If they see you, Caton nodded. Then I go. But remember this, Abby Thornton. No matter what they teach you about love, it is not obedience. It is not duty. It is the courage to see another's soul and call it your own. He mounted his horse and turned toward the horizon. She wanted to call after him, but the words froze in her throat. When he was gone, she sank to her knees, tears mixing with the dust. The hawk still circled above, its cry echoing like a promise she couldn't bear to keep. By the time she rode back to the ranch, night had fallen. Her father waited on the porch, his face stern. You've been gone too long again, he said coldly. You'll not ride alone anymore. Yes, father, she replied quietly. But her eyes, once so soft and uncertain, now held a quiet fire he could not extinguish. In her heart she belonged no longer to Silver Creek, nor even to the world of her birth. She had crossed a line that could never be erased, the invisible border between fear and understanding, between obedience and love. And somewhere in the vast silence of the desert, a proud Apache warrior rode beneath the stars, knowing that though the world might keep them apart, their souls had already found one another, bound not by blood or law, but by the fiercest kind of love, the kind that lives on even when the world forbids it. Winter came to the Arizona territory like a slow-moving ghost, dusting the mesas with frost and stilling the desert winds. The people of Silver Creek spoke less of the missing months, the strange tale of the colonel's daughter and her time among the Apache. The gossip had died down, but the whispers had not. To the townsfolk, she had returned alive, yet not the same. Abigail Thornton moved like a spirit through her father's grand ranch house. Her beauty had not dimmed, but the softness of girlhood had hardened into quiet strength. Her laughter was rare now. She spent long hours by the window, watching the horizon where the red desert met the sky. At times she thought she heard him, Caton, in the sigh of the wind, in the lonely cry of hawks that circled the canyons at dusk. She dreamed of him often, the way his voice sounded in the firelight, the warmth of his hands, the calm in his eyes when he'd said goodbye. But her father, Colonel Thornton, could not bear the sight of her silence. To him, every trace of the Apache in her eyes was an insult to his blood and his past. So he arranged what he believed would save her, a respectable engagement to Lieutenant James Cartwright, her one-time suitor and the man he trusted more than any other. James came to her again that winter, full of gentle persuasion. You've suffered enough, Abby, he told her, his hand resting lightly on hers. Let me give you peace. We'll go east, leave this place behind. You'll forget what happened. She looked at him, kind, honorable, well-intentioned, and felt only a deep ache. Peace? She said softly. You can't marry peace into a heart that's still alive. He frowned. Alive? Abby, what you feel amidst confusion. You were frightened. You've built something in your mind that isn't real. Her voice turned to ice. Don't tell me what's real, Lieutenant. That was the end of it between them, though neither her father nor the town would see it that way. They spoke of her as a poor girl touched by wildness, a spirit broken by savages. The gossip gnawed at her until she could no longer step into the chapel or the mercantile without feeling eyes upon her. So she rode, often and far. The open land became her only refuge, but she never rode beyond the old line of mesquite trees that marked the edge of the Thornton land. Beyond that was Apache territory, and with it danger and memory in equal measure. One bitter morning, a cry shattered the calm. The town bell clanged. Riders thundered down from the north, shouting of an outlaw raid. A band of deserters and drifters who had hit the stagecoach near Silver Creek, taking horses, supplies, and blood. By nightfall, the raiders reached the Thornton Ranch. Their leader, a scarred man named Vince Mallory, was an old soldier turned bandit, a man who hated the army, the law, and anyone who bore either's name. He and his gang stormed through the ranch gates, guns drawn. Abby was in the barn when the chaos began. She heard shouting, gunfire, the terrified screams of the ranch hands. She ducked behind a hay cart as Mallory strode in, his face half shadowed by lantern light. "Well now," he sneered when he saw her. "Ain't you a fine sight out here in the cold?" He grabbed her arm, yanking her close. "Colonel's girl, eh? You'll fetch us a fine bit of ransom." Abby fought back, slapping him across the face. He laughed, more amused than angry. "Feisty. I like that." Before he could say more, a sound broke through the night, a sharp whistle like the cry of a hawk. Mallory turned, confused. A shadow moved at the edge of the barn, silent and swift. The lantern flame flickered, then burst as an arrow sliced through it. In the chaos that followed, the outlaw's laughter turned to screams. A figure stepped from the darkness, tall, lean, his face painted with the black streaks of war. Katan. Abby gasped his name. He moved like wind and thunder, striking with the precision of a hawk in flight. The barn erupted in smoke and shouting. One by one, the raiders fell until only Mallory remained. He swung his revolver, firing wildly. Katan darted aside, grabbed his wrist, and with a sharp twist sent the gun spinning into the straw. When it was over, Mallory lay unconscious, bound with his own belt. Katan turned to Abby, his chest heaving, blood streaked along his arm. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, still trembling. "You're bleeding." "It is nothing," he said, brushing it aside. Tears filled her eyes. "You came back." Katan looked at her as though no time had passed. "The wind carried your name. I followed it." For a long moment they stood facing each other in the barn's smoky half-light, two souls caught between war and tenderness. Then the sound of horses echoed from beyond the ranch. Soldiers and her father's men answering the alarm. "You must go," she whispered urgently. "If they find you here," but Katan did not move. "If I go now, they will say you were saved by chance. I want them to know the truth." Before she could stop him, he stepped into the open yard. The soldiers, led by Colonel Thornton himself, reined their horses in, rifles drawn. "Abby," the colonel shouted, riding forward. His eyes went wide when he saw the man beside her. "Apache." "No, father," Abby cried, rushing between them. "He saved me. He saved us all." The colonel froze. His gaze moved from his daughter to the warrior beside her, and in that instant the world seemed to stop. The air was thick with the tension of years. War, hate, pride. Katan spoke, his English steady. "Your daughter is safe because I was here." One of the soldiers raised his rifle. The colonel barked, "Hold your fire!" His voice cracked like thunder. The silence that followed was unbearable. Abby clutched Katan's arm, her eyes pleading. "Please," she whispered to her father. "Let him go." The colonel's jaw tightened. He had lost too many men to the Apache to ever forgive their kind. Yet in Katan's face he saw not the enemy but a man. A man who had risked his life to save his child. At last the colonel lowered his gun. "Go," he said quietly. "Before I change my mind." Katan nodded once. "I go, but I will come again. The desert remembers those who belong to it." And then he was gone, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as he had come. For days after, Silver Creek could talk of nothing else. The colonel's daughter saved by a savage, the same one who had once taken her months before. Some called it fate, others folly, but Abby no longer cared for the opinions of men. Her father forbade her to speak of Katan again, but she defied him in silence. Every evening she walked to the edge of the desert where the mesquite trees grew sparse, standing there until night swallowed the land. Sometimes she thought she saw him, a shadow on a ridge, a figure against the stars. Once she found a single hawk feather tied to her gatepost. She held it to her heart and smiled through tears. They both knew the world would never bless what they felt. Yet love on the frontier had never cared for the laws of men. It belonged to the wind, the dust, and the stars. And in the heart of the Arizona desert, where blood and memory met beneath the open sky, Katan, the hawk who walks alone, had returned not as a ghost but as a promise. Spring crept slowly over the desert that year. The rains came late, and the earth, long starved, drank greedily of every drop. Green shoots broke through red dust, and wildflowers covered the canyons like spilled paint. Yet even as life returned to the land, Abigail Thornton felt no peace within her heart. Months had passed since the night Katan had saved her from the outlaw raid. The ranch still bore the scars, bullet holes in the barn beams, scorch marks on the gate. But the people of Silver Creek had already turned the tale into legend. Some said the Apache warrior had been a ghost. Others claimed he'd been one of her father's hired scouts. Only Abby knew the truth. She carried that truth quietly close to her heart like a secret flame that refused to die. She had seen the line between enemy and savior blur, had felt the kind of love that made the world both larger and more dangerous. She could not unsee it. Her father never spoke Katan's name again. But his silence was a wall she could not climb. He rode often with the soldiers now, leading new patrols deeper into Apache lands as if by chasing the enemy, he could erase what had happened. Abby knew it wasn't hatred that drove him. It was pride and a wounded heart. Lieutenant Cartwright still came around, though his visits had turned stiff and awkward. He spoke to her father more than to her now. Once, when she passed him in town, he removed his hat and said, "You deserve a safer life than this, Abby." She had looked at him calmly. Safety's a poor trade for love. He'd had no answer to that. The days grew long and hot again. Each evening, when the sky turned gold, Abby would ride to the ridge where desert met horizon, the place where Katan had once promised to return. She would sit there watching the hawks circle high above, their cries lost in the wind. Then one evening, as the sun bled into the mountains, she saw him. He came from the west, riding alone, just as before, and a dark figure against the dying light. Her heart stopped, then raced as he dismounted and approached. The years had touched him lightly, his face older, his eyes wiser, but his bearing unchanged and proud, steady. "Unbroken, Katan," she whispered, barely breathing the name. "I told you," he said softly. "The desert remembers." They stood close, the silence between them heavy with all the words they'd never spoken. At last she said, "If my father knew you were here." "He already knows," Katan interrupted gently. "His soldiers ride again. They move through the southern pass. There will be blood before the moon rises." Fear washed over her. "You came to warn me?" "I came to see you," he said. "And to end this war." She shook her head. "You can't end what men have built out of hate." Katan looked toward the distant ridge. "Then let them build their hate. I will not carry it," his gaze softened. "But I will carry you if you choose to come." Her breath caught. "You want me to leave everything?" "Everything that is not yours," he answered. "The land does not care for names or fences. It only knows what belongs to it. You belong to the wind now, not the walls." For a long moment she could not speak. All her life she had lived between duty and desire, between the safety her father promised and the freedom her heart demanded. And now, standing before the man who had shown her both mercy and fire, she knew that every path worth taking required sacrifice. She nodded once. "Then I'll come." They rode through the night across the open plains and into the high desert. The stars spread vast and cold above them, and the moonlight silvered the cliffs. Abby felt as though she were shedding her old self with every mile. The girl who had once trembled before danger was gone. What remained was a woman who had seen the cost of love and accepted it. Katan led her to a narrow valley tucked between ridges, a place hidden from both soldier and scout. A stream wound through it lined with cottonwoods. A small shelter stood there made of stone and hide. "This was my father's place," Katan said. "He built it before the wars came. It was where we went to find peace." Abby stepped inside, touching the rough walls, breathing the scent of smoke and cedar. "It's beautiful," she whispered. For days they lived as though the world beyond the canyon did not exist. Katan hunted. Abby tended the fire, gathering herbs and water. They spoke little, needing no words. At night they lay beneath the stars, the sound of crickets and wind filling the silence. He taught her to ride bareback, to follow the signs of the earth, the prints of deer, the direction of wind through the grass. She learned quickly, laughing when she fell, rising to try again. In turn, she taught him small things from her old life, songs from the parlor piano, words from books she had loved. He listened, repeating the sounds with care, his accent softening under her laughter. For the first time, both of them felt whole, but peace on the frontier never lasted. One evening, as they watched the sunset from the ridge, Caton stiffened. Smoke rose in the distance, black and heavy. "Soldiers," he said quietly. "They've found the pass." Abby's heart turned cold. "We have to leave." He shook his head. "No, if we run, they'll hunt us forever. I'll speak with them." "You can't. They'll kill you on sight." Caton's eyes met hers. "Then I will die standing." Before she could stop him, he kissed her. A fierce, wordless promise. "You gave me back my spirit," he whispered. "Now I will give you peace." He mounted his horse and rode toward the smoke. Abby followed despite his protests, her fear drowned by love. When the soldiers appeared, 20 men led by Colonel Thornton himself, the sun had dipped below the cliffs. Caton rode out to meet them, his hands raised in peace. "Hold fire," the colonel commanded, though his men's rifles were already aimed. "What are you doing here, savage?" Caton spoke calmly. "I come not for war, but for her." He gestured toward Abby, who rode up beside him. Gasps rippled through the ranks. "Abby," her father said, his face pale with fury and disbelief. "What in God's name?" "I'm here by my own choice," she said firmly. "He's not your enemy. Not anymore." The colonel's hand trembled around his reins. "You don't know what you're saying." "He's turned your mind." Caton's gaze did not waver. "No man turns the heart. It finds its path like water through stone." Cartwright, now a captain, spurred his horse forward. "Sir, he's lying. It's a trap!" Before the colonel could answer, one nervous soldier fired. The shot cracked through the air like lightning. Caton staggered, clutching his side. "Caton!" Abby screamed, leaping from her horse. She caught him before he fell, blood staining her hands. The colonel shouted for a ceasefire, his voice breaking. But it was too late. The damage was done. Caton's eyes fluttered open. He smiled faintly, his voice barely a whisper. "Do not weep, little dove. Love does not end here. Don't you dare leave me," she cried. "You taught me how to live, and now you stay and live with me." He touched her cheek with trembling fingers. "I am in the wind now. You will feel me in every dawn." Then his hand fell still. Abby pressed her forehead to his chest, sobbing. The desert around them was silent, the soldiers frozen in shame. The colonel dismounted, his face hollow. "I never meant," he murmured, but his words died in the dry wind. Abby looked up at him, her eyes blazing. "You taught me to hate what you never understood. He taught me to love what I was born to fear. Tell me, father, which of you was truly civilized?" She buried Caton herself beneath a lone mesquite tree overlooking the valley. The soldiers watched from a distance as she laid a hawk feather on his grave. Then she turned her horse toward the open desert and rode away without another word. Years later, travelers passing through Silver Creek would sometimes speak of a woman who rode alone through the high canyons, her hair streaked with gold and dust. She left flowers by a hidden grave each spring, and some said she spoke softly to the wind, as though answering a voice only she could hear. They said she never married, never settled, and that when the hawks circled low above the mesas, you could see her lift her face to the sky and smile. And so the legend endured of Abigail Thornton, the colonel's daughter who was once too young to love, and of Caton, the hawk who walks alone, who taught her that true love was not bound by blood or nation or name, only by the courage to see another's soul and call it home.